Coming up in just a moment, Lord Timothy Kirkhope, as you can see, joining me here on the red sofa to talk about £8 million a day to house more than 50,000 asylum seekers in hotels, 400 hotels in the UK. Yesterday, the Immigration Minister, Robert Jenrick, announced plans to clear 50 of those hotels. This is what he said this morning.
In cheaper and more appropriate forms of accommodation, we've stood up large military sites. We've stood up the barge in Portland, and we're finding cheaper forms of housing in areas across the country. It was never the right policy to have people in hotels. It was born out of the very large numbers that were coming across a year or two ago. Now fewer people are crossing, thankfully, although there's a great deal more to do. As a result of that, we're able to make this first step and return hotels to use by business, tourism, leisure.
So does he have a point, my lord?
Oh, he has a point, all right, because we're spending far too much money accommodating people whose cases ought to be dealt with, and where in appropriate circumstances they don't meet the strict criteria of the 51 Refugee Convention, they should be returned. OK. You've previously said, in fact, back in March, you said the government was going about things the wrong way with curbing migration. They've reached agreements with countries like France, I suppose, to a certain extent, certainly countries like Albania. Are they heading in the right direction now? Well, yes. I mean, I think they're heading in the right direction on migration generally, because, of course, the problem is that I think a lot of ministers seem to have confused, put the asylum figures together with migration figures. Yeah. Of course, particularly since we left the EU, we've got complete control over who we allow to migrate to the country and for what reason. And we need to deal with that very severely. And I think I'm very pleased that from January, anyway, the government at least is going to stop this flow of dependence on the back of those who come here to study. And in my day, of course, and it's all right saying in my day because things have changed. That was back in the 90s. Well, yes, I know. And to be fair to the government, things have dramatically changed. But in those days, students coming to this country came on their own. OK, there's been a change in profile of students, but the truth is they're now bringing dependents. 136,000 of the million people who have migrated to this country in a year are just dependents of students coming here. Those sort of figures have to be dealt with, and the government is going to. But on asylum, I think the key point about asylum, I don't like some of the proposals in the illegal migration bill, for instance. I don't think Rwanda is a good idea. Or in fact, I don't think it's a legal thing to do. But with asylum seekers, we really ought to go back to the 51 Convention. And when I look at the figures when I was minister, and we were applying those sort of... It's a very difficult thing to get asylum. You've got to prove that your life is in jeopardy or that your long-term freedom is going to be destroyed. An awful lot of people who've been granted asylum in this country in recent years haven't met those criteria. And I think we ought to get back to them. And this sounds a little bit hard, but it's important. And it was fairly done in my day. A very small percentage of people who came here as asylum seekers could meet those criteria. And they were returned promptly. Their cases were dealt with quickly. They were returned promptly to the countries from which they had originally come. Countries that didn't like that, for instance, there were some countries that weren't taking people back, even though they could not prove the criteria for asylum. We told those countries in no uncertain terms, look, the relationship between ourselves and you and the grants and the general sort of relationship, as I say, is in jeopardy if you don't take those people back. You must take them back because you claim to be a country of freedom and democracy and human rights. If that is the case, these people must be safe and they must be protected. Should the British government offer a safe route for Gazans? Sorry? People from Gaza. Well, that's a matter. I think this is where you get into the area of programmes. I was responsible in '96 for the United Nations Bosnian resettlement programme, where we were very proud to have quite a few thousand people who came here from Bosnia during those ghastly wars. And these are things that we ought to do, I think, talking to the United Nations or internationally, rather than just a UK initiative. So whether or not people from Gaza or indeed from any other trouble spot in the world are given permission to come here on a short-term basis, that's entirely a matter, I think, where we should be discussing it in an international way. Can we agree that the boats are not, and the small boat crossings, and those that come on those boats are not the biggest issue when it comes to people coming into the UK and staying? No, I mean, we've forgotten about all the other people who are arriving here to claim asylum. They come in various ways. In my day, of course, very few people would risk the channel. Very few people were subject to the people smugglers and the sort of money makers who push them into boats, which puts them in jeopardy. I think we're all agreed that we should stop the boats. It's how you do that. And our failure, I'm afraid, on this one, firstly, is because we are... You expect me to mention Europe. This is where everyone groans at me and says, get over it. But the truth of the matter is that once we're no longer in the EU, then we haven't quite got the same capacity to return people to our immediate neighbours that we had before. But I think as far as the boats are concerned, they're only one element of people coming here, back of lorries, you know, and other illicit ways. But however anybody arrives, when they claim asylum, at that point, they're not really illegal. And I think that's one big mistake that the government has made. Yeah. We have to redress that, Kay.
OK. We must leave it there, my lord, but it's interesting. Thank you very much indeed for taking the time.
Pleasure.
Very much appreciated. Thank you. Quick look at the weather.